How can this even be looked at as safe? Carrying in the appendix. Why not just put it there? Be done with it. Put it there and game over. Mickey with carrytrainer.com. Blue gun. Nobody behind the camera, but we're still going to exhibit good habits. How can this position, the appendix, the over the weenus position, be considered safe? It breaks the cardinal gun rule of safety, doesn't it? It's pointing the gun towards myself. Well, let's talk about it. First and foremost, the question is not, is this safe? The question is, are you safe? Am I safe? Is he or she safe? That's the best question that we need to be asking. The inanimate object is not unsafe. The user is. Every time we climb a ladder, we get in a vehicle, we go on a boat, we climb a tree, we run a chainsaw, we chop vegetables. We are doing something that could hurt us. We need to have safety practices, a mindset, and systems that are going to help us get the outcome that we want. So let's go back in time. Why would we even consider carrying here? Why not use a shoulder holster, an ankle holster, a hip, or small of the buttocks holster? Why go here? Go back in history, and warriors figured out long ago that weapons forward of the hip were easier to draw, to deploy. Of course, you're going to see guys with things on their back and hip line, but from this position, hips forward, I can hide it. I can retain it with good grappling posture. I can get it very simply without you seeing it, right? There's a lot of benefits. So having it in this position is not just cool. It is quite literally a decision to put the gun in a more advantageous position. Hard stop there. Come way closer to current history, 1950s and 60s, post-World War II, the leather slap competition. So most of what we know today about shooting pistols quickly came and comes from the competition world. Anybody that denies that wants to think a Navy SEAL or Green Beret is coming up with most of the tactics and techniques that we're using for pistols is wrong. Most of what we know comes from and continues to come from top competitive shooters. Just like most of what we know about driving cars well comes from race car drivers. If you go back to those 50s and 60s, the leather slap competitions, Colonel Cooper was actually part of this stuff. You'll see guys carrying leather holsters in this position. They're 1911s most likely, and they would slap the leather, hence leather slap, and draw their pistol. Those competitions became IPSC, IDPA, USPSA as these things evolved. Pretty interesting. And what those guys found is having that gun up closer to the front of the body made it faster. Now, things had gone back and forth from this position to this position. And of course, if you're lefty, it would be the opposite. There are some nuances there. Something that is strictly competition rigs, where the gun is off the body and set up for pure speed, where concealment is not an issue. It shouldn't be discussed for the video in context, because we're talking about carrying a gun in everyday life. That said, moving on. Is this safe? I started by saying what matters is if you are safe, the handler. If we look at instances of people shooting themselves in and out of the holster, drawing, a lot of it happens because of this. I'm going to go so fast, and the trigger is actuated far too soon in the sequence. Years ago, groups of guys that I trained with, Les Keys Martoni, one of my buddies, he and I put ourselves on high-speed cameras. We were convinced that we were in no way, shape, or form coming near the trigger until the gun was way out in front of us. But what we found is stuff like this was happening. We were starting to actuate the trigger. The gun was clear of the holster, but think about the fractions, the tenths of seconds or hundredths of seconds from here to here. And as we start to push that envelope, you'll see the famous Tex Grubner, right? I just shot myself. Remember, he shoots himself in the leg?
Footage that I'm about to show you is what actually happened. I just fucking shot myself.
The leg. As the gun comes up, look at where this gun is oriented. we often think that because the gun's on the hip, we're never orienting it towards ourselves. Well, check it out. Think about where my leg is. I'm going to move back as far as possible. Look at my leg. You're the target. As the gun clears, look, I am pointing at my leg, at my foot, at my ankle. If I was going to not do that, there's a couple ways I could do that. I could toss my hip out, clear, and come around. But there could be people this way. The direct line from holster to the target, 100% traverses my hip, my leg, my knee, and all of the vessels and bits that are inside of there. Conversely, from here, as this gun clears, it's immediately pointing away. For most of us, once the gun is in the holster, it is considered safe. In fact, some training doctrines, you will hear an instructor, and this isn't Mickey saying this is special operations guys that I've trained with, they'll have nomenclature on the range, make it safe. That doesn't mean flick the safety. They're saying put the gun up, done. Right? If it was a carbine, safety on, muzzle down, the instructor's going to walk out, something like that. But the term could be make it safe. And that literally means recover back to the holster. So for some people, make it safe, put it away, put it to bed. Once we're in the holster, we know that that gun is probably not going to go off. I say probably because that is considering that we've got a safe firearm that's not been bastardized by some home gunsmithing that makes it unsafe. 2, we've got a holster that completely and entirely covers securely the trigger guard so that nothing can go in here. This is a really nice Tenicor outside the waistband holster. Today I'm using Tenicor's Zero Belt, very nice. And then I've got one of Dark Star Gear's inside the waistband holsters, great product. I've got tons of videos on holsters. Go check those out if you're interested. But what you'll see with these holsters is they are completely encapsulating the trigger. Nothing can get in there. I mean, you could probably take a screwdriver and jam it in there, but now think about what's happening if something like that's happening, right? That's a different animal. I don't want soft materials that can be collapsed. And there are holsters out there. I've seen belly band holsters and things like that where you can push the fabric in and actuate the trigger. That's a no-go. So coming out of the holster, just to reiterate, that gun clears from this position and it's immediately pointed away from my body. I'm going to stand in some various stances just so we can see from this position. I'm pointed at my leg as I clear. I'm pointed at my leg and foot. So just, if we're going to be honest, we're flagging ourselves when we're coming out of these holsters. Unless you're pointing to the right side of the range or the grocery store or wherever you're at, away from your body, or left if you're a lefty. Going back into the holster. This I have more control over. And I teach students this. As I recover to the holster, for years and years and years, the idea was never look at the holster. I started arguing that 10, 15 years ago online, and I got a lot of hate. I think people absorbed that, not just from me, but others. I can control this, do whatever I need to do, and I can make a big deliberate movement. If you see that around my foot, people will laugh at me. Why are you doing that? Well, because I don't want to point the gun at my leg if I don't have to. Makes sense? So I can make a big deliberate move on my hip. I can push my hip out like, hey, see that? And I can recover. Why wouldn't I? Every good choice I make, I'm going to remove potential issues where I could injure myself. In this position, as I come back to the holster, do whatever I got to do to the gun. Every time, finger is high off the trigger, pelvis forward. And now why pelvis forward? Because now that gun is oriented away from my knees and my feet. Am I still pointing it at my peen? That's the discussion that often comes up. A lot of that has to do with holster setup, guys. So I take the holster out, not to be perverted, but my man bits are right here. This muzzle, if oriented the way that I like to use the gun, it is now positioned right here. You see that? So I'm not actually pointing it at my junk. I am pointing it straight through here. And that depends on the gun, the holster, etc. Now when we sit, different animal exists. Very important, again, that you have high quality holster, high quality ammunition, high quality gun that's unmolested and not going to go off. Some of those things do happen. Now, anecdotally, my recollection. This isn't science. This is just me recollecting. I hear stories constantly. In fact, I just heard one from a paramedic friend of mine, a guy he knows actually, who's in the Army. I'm not going to say the guy's name, shot himself in the holster or going in and out of the holster. And a lot of times this happens. Finger on the trigger as we go in, or something like material on our clothes gets caught up. And as we go in, the trigger's actuated, the gun works as designed and discharges around. He shot himself in the leg. I hear those stories 2, 3, 4 times a year. Almost every single one of them is on the hip or the small of the butt. Rarely, I'm going to show a picture here, do I hear of it happening here. And I think, my 2 cents, the reason it doesn't happen here as much is not because of the position, but my guess is that people who choose to carry in this position probably have a greater exposure to training because they understand the benefits of this position. They have a greater understanding of safety, and they have more familiarity with their firearm. Now, if you're listening to this and you're like, I would never carry there and I know everything about guns, that's cool, man. I'm talking in generalities. You might know everything, but the people that are shooting themselves from any of these positions made a mistake. So how do we never shoot ourselves or somebody else coming in or out of the holster? I use this phrase on the range: dominate the muzzle, dominate the trigger guard, dominate the space around you and downrange and beyond the targets. I'm using my little range voice here. When I say dominate, it doesn't mean raw. It means I see it, I own it, I see it, I own it, I see it. I know what's going on. I'm not going to accidentally point my gun at somebody or punch my gun out or, God forbid, have my finger lingering on the trigger. We have redundancies in safety. I dominate the muzzle. Gun goes off accidentally. I've got it pointed in a safe direction. I look like a fool, but nobody got hurt. Finger on the trigger and lacks muzzle discipline. Now we start to have some issues. As the gun goes to the holster, I picked this up from my buddy Jeff Gonzalez, by the way. Dominate the muzzle, and then verify. Here was the thing that Jeff imprinted on me years ago. Verify that the trigger guard's clear. I tell my students do this. Verify it visually, verify it verbally. The trigger guard's clear. Verify that the holster is clear. Visually, verbally, the holster is clear. And safely recover to the holster. There's no world that I live in where I need to do things like this. Now we try to argue, well, what if? What if nothing, man? If the whole world's falling apart, me shooting myself or shooting somebody else with a negligent discharge doesn't help. So the pause for cause, the 2 seconds to go, trigger guard's clear, holster's clear, safely holstered, does not add fuel to a fire. So is this position safe? Doesn't matter what I think, it matters what you think. Have the correct gear, have the correct belt, have a safe functioning firearm, and then practice good practices, good systems, good techniques. Mickey with CarryTrainer.com. I hope that this discussion helps. Be well, don't be dickheads. Video today brought to you guys from CCWSAFE. There's a link on CarryTrainer.com to get the best coverage if you are interested in that. And as always, check out Ignis Lux Coffee, the best coffee in the world. Why? Because I roasted it myself. It's become a passion and a hobby, and it's quite delish. IgnisLuxCoffee.com. Be well, don't be dickheads. Tell somebody you love them. Don't point guns at yourself. Bye now. So what exactly is a squib? Let's first get a couple things straight. The components that go into the finished cartridge: a clean, solid, sorted brass, or new. You've got your projectile, whatever type it might be, your bullet. You've got the propellant, or gunpowder. And then, of course, the primer, the thing that starts that chain reaction, igniting and burning this powder. A squib happens when a cartridge has too little propellant or gunpowder to send the projectile or bullet out of the barrel. interesting. Let's take a look. Sure enough, I have a squib. Here's how we're going to deal with that. Good hardwood dowel or a brass rod. Get a solid surface. Drive that sucker right out. Oh, hey,